T-Dipe seeks refuge at CEO James's home. Will love and justice prevail? The storm outside mirrored the one within her heart. The rain had not stopped for days, and the roads were flooded, yet none of it could compare to the deluge of fear, confusion, and longing T-Dipe carried silently. She stood at the doorstep of James's family home, hesitant yet hopeful, unaware that this step would not only change her fate, but uncover the cruel hand that had long been pulling strings in the shadows. A mother's warmth in a world of cold. When James's mother welcomed T-Dipe into her home, it wasn't just an act of kindness, it was a healing balm for a girl who had grown up without the comfort of parents. The way the older woman offered her fruit, asked about her well-being, and softly apologized for dragging her into the storm of James's life, it made T-Dipe's voice tremble as she confessed, "You make me miss my mom so much." For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to be vulnerable. James, who arrived just after the conversation, noticed the tearful shimmer in her eyes. "Don't go out in the rain anymore," he said, his voice full of concern. The moment was quiet, tender, and beneath that quietness, a silent promise was made. He would protect her at all costs. Refuge turned battlefield. Though T-Dipe hesitated at first, afraid of being a burden, James's mother insisted, and James himself offered unwavering support. At last, she agreed to stay. But peace was short-lived. The culprits who had once attacked her, masked and ruthless, weren't just petty criminals, they were hired by someone powerful, and now they were watching. James knew the danger. He wasn't just a CEO anymore, he was a man with everything to lose. With the help of Tongue, his loyal friend who had once saved T-Dipe from harm, and the local police, James launched a quiet investigation. Surveillance footage, a hidden voice recording device, and witness testimony slowly began painting a horrifying picture. The mask falls. It wasn't long before the pieces fell into place. John, once James's trusted associate, was revealed to be the puppeteer. His motive, revenge. Long ago, John's family had lost everything in a land deal, and now he had returned, not only to destroy James's company, but to strike where it would hurt most. T-Dipe. But this time, justice struck first. In a joint operation, James and the police set a trap. John, believing he had lured T-Dipe into a vulnerable position, arrived at a supposed meeting spot only to be surrounded by officers and arrested on the spot. James stood nearby, silent but resolute, eyes locked on the man who had nearly shattered everything he loved. Healing in the aftermath. As dawn broke the next morning, the sky finally cleared. T-Dipe, sitting on the porch of James's house, watched the first sunlight after days of storm. She turned as James sat beside her. No words were spoken, but none were needed. He was her shield, and she was his heart. Later that week, James's mother prepared a warm meal, and the three of them shared it in quiet peace. T-Dipe was no longer just a guest, she was family. Conclusion: love amidst the chaos. T-Dipe had not only found refuge, she had found a home. Through rain, betrayal, and fear, she and James stood strong, hand in hand. And though the storm had tested them, it had also proven something unbreakable. When love is real, even the darkest enemies cannot destroy it. Chapter 2: The Quiet Before the Next Storm. Days passed. Life at James's house began to settle into a peaceful rhythm. T-Dipe helped in the kitchen, tended to the small garden in the backyard, and occasionally laughed over tea with James's mother. But no matter how calm things appeared, she couldn't shake the unease buried deep in her chest. James was busy more than ever, his company shaken by betrayal, targeted by hidden enemies, and nearly destroyed, was in survival mode. Meetings stretched into the night. His eyes, once full of confidence, now carried shadows of exhaustion and responsibility. But every evening, no matter how late, he found time to sit beside T-Dipe, to hold her hand in silence, or to simply watch the stars together. One night, she asked him softly, "Aren't you tired of protecting me?" He turned to her, voice steady, "T-Dipe, you are the only thing that gives meaning to all of this. If I have to protect you every day for the rest of my life, I will without hesitation. Her heart trembled again. But this time, it was not fear, it was love. New wounds, old truths. Just when the two thought they might finally have a moment of peace, an unexpected letter arrived. It was from a former business partner of James's father, an old man now living in the countryside. Burdened with guilt, the letter was simple but devastating. Your father didn't just invest in that land, he destroyed lives to take it. John's hatred comes from truth. James read it again and again, unable to believe it. He had built his empire on the foundation laid by a man he had admired all his life. But what if that foundation was stolen? T. Dipe found him in the study, crushed by the weight of the letter. So it's true, he whispered. My family hurt his. Maybe I deserved this all along. But T. Dipe walked toward him, eyes fierce. No, you're not your father. You're not the past. You fight for people, for fairness, and for me. If we run from the truth, we let it win. But if we face it together, we build something better. And in that moment, James realized the greatest strength he had was not power or money, but her. Trouble returns wearing a new face. Just as the two began investigating the past more deeply, a new character entered their lives, Min. A charming, soft-spoken CEO who had once vanished from the business world to live a quiet life playing guitar, on sidewalks and helping orphans. But now, he had returned, and with him came kindness, investment offers, and a quiet affection for T. Dipe. She recognized him instantly. You were the man playing guitar in front of the market, she said. He smiled, and you were the only one who noticed. James, watching from across the room, felt something stir inside him, a jealousy he never thought he was capable of. Min's intentions were unclear. Was he truly back for business or for her? The seeds of a new battle, as James and T. Dipe tried to rebuild his company, secure new agricultural partnerships, and clear his family name. Min's influence began to grow. Investors were swayed by his charisma. The media loved his redemption story. And most dangerously, T. Dipe began to laugh in a way she hadn't in weeks when she was with him. James tried to brush it off. He told himself she was just being polite, but the seed of doubt had already taken root. One night, as rain fell once more on the windows, James stood in the hallway and overheard T. Dipe talking to Min on the phone. She laughed. She called him a good man, and for the first time, James was afraid not of losing a company, but of losing the woman he loved. Chapter 3, Whispers of the Heart. The days that followed were delicate. Like walking on cracked glass, James became quieter. His smile faded into something polite, distant. He worked later, spoke less, and often sat in the garden alone, watching the sky as though searching for answers in the clouds. Every time T. Dipe asked if he was okay, he would smile and say, "Of course. You're here, aren't you?" But she felt it, the wall slowly rising between them. Min, meanwhile, began to appear more often. He offered to help James's company with a bridge project that would bring water to farmlands, a lifeline in the aftermath of the failed hydroelectric dam scandal. Investors were interested. His reputation, paired with his charm, gave people hope. One afternoon, Min found T. Dipe alone outside the market. She was buying vegetables for dinner. He handed her a small bouquet of wildflowers. "From my mother's garden," he said gently. She used to say wildflowers are like good women, strong enough to grow without needing permission. T. Dipe didn't take the flowers at first. "Min, you know I'm with James." "I do," Min said with a nod. "But I also know what pain looks like in someone's eyes. If he doesn't fight for you, someone else will." He left before she could reply. She stood in the street, the flowers in her hand, heart beating like thunder. An unexpected truth. That night, T. Dipe couldn't sleep. Her thoughts circled endlessly Min's words, James's distance, and the growing ache in her chest. She stood up, walked outside, and found James still in his office. He didn't look up when she entered, just stared at the computer screen, a list of canceled contracts open in front of him. "I don't want to lose you," she said quietly. He finally looked at her, eyes tired. I'm already losing everything else. I didn't want you to be part of that too. I don't care about money, James. She whispered, I care about you. And in that moment, she collapsed into his arms and broke into tears. James held her tightly, burying his face in her hair. I'm scared, Dipe. I'm scared that the world I built is nothing but a lie, that the sins of my father will destroy everything I love. She pulled back, cupped his face in her hands. Then let's build something new, together. A new life begins. A week later, T-Dipe began feeling sick. At first, she thought it was the stress. But when the nausea lingered and the fatigue worsened, she went to the doctor. The test was positive. She was pregnant. Shock and wonder filled her at once. She sat in the quiet clinic room, hands trembling on her lap. Her first thought wasn't about herself, it was about James. How would he react that night? She didn't tell him. She cooked his favorite dinner, listened to him talk about work, and kissed him goodnight as though everything was the same. But inside her, a secret was blooming, a life that would change everything. John's final card. Just as life hinted at calm, the storm returned. From prison, John managed to leak confidential files to the press, documents linking James's father to illegal land seizures, buried bribes, and forged ownership records. The news exploded. Reporters camped outside James's house. Former allies turned cold. His company's shares plummeted. And just as planned, men stepped forward. He offered to buy out James's shares to save the company. Investors cheered. The public welcomed the shift. The board of directors began to pressure James to resign, but James wasn't ready to surrender. Not yet. Life lesson: love, loyalty, and courage in the storm. In life, we often face storms, moments of betrayal, fear, and uncertainty. Sometimes, those closest to us carry wounds we cannot see, and the world we trust can fall apart in a single moment. But through the story of T-Dipe and James, we learn something powerful. True love is not measured by comfort, but by how we stand beside each other in chaos. T-Dipe chose to stay when things got hard. She could have walked away, but she didn't. She believed in the man behind the pain. And James, though broken by his past, found healing through her unwavering loyalty. This story teaches us that loyalty is louder than promises. Trust is built not in sunshine, but in storm. And strength is not about never falling, but about choosing to rise with someone by your side. We all carry secrets, burdens, and pasts we can't rewrite, but the future, that's still in our hands. So, choose courage, choose compassion, and when you find someone worth fighting for, never let go.